NetrunnerQuest. I am your host, Code Marvelous, joined by a couple of my co-hosts, including Laura, otherwise known as Oslet, and Sanjay, always known as Sanjay.
Hi, how's it going?
And in addition to my two compatriots, we have with us a very special guest, Russell, otherwise known as Tolaasin, from the United Kingdom. Thank you so much for being with us, Russell.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here.
So we recently met up in Meat Space Netrunner for the very, very fun King of Subways tournament. And we decided that it would be really, really awesome to have you on to talk about some of the experience that you've had around that tournament in particular, but in Netrunner in general, the way you view it and kind of travel around, but also prepping for big tournaments. But why don't we talk a little bit about you, get a little bit of your Netrunner story, and then we'll dive into it.
Sure. So it's an absolute privilege and a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm completing one of the elements of my bucket list, which was to be a guest on a podcast. So that's really super fun. So I started playing Netrunner in the middle of 2015. I read an article in The Guardian, UK newspaper, about this game and it was the story of somebody going to their first tournament and written by their partner. And it was actually Catherine, who I now is a really good friend. And I practice with her quite regularly now. So it was an article about her first tournament, and this game seemed really super cool. So I talked to my son about it, and we ordered a core set, and then spent 2 hours trying to figure out the rule set on our dining table, much as you all did, I suspect. And the rest is kind of history. So what else could I say about myself? So I am the second oldest Netrunner player in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure about the world, but I'm pretty much up there. So I'm not part of the conventional demographic, but I love this game. I just got really involved in the community. So I love the Netrunner community. It's been really eye-opening in a variety of different ways. For my sins, I moderate stimhack.com. I moderate stimhack.slack.com. And I also am the author of the Vegetable Alt Arts, which you may have seen and which were actually prizes at
which I will say, yes. I think you've done a lot of good things for the community. I think that is the thing that makes you is the number one thing that makes you a celebrity in my eyes. I love those vegetable arts; they are incredible.
I'm all about the vegetable alt arts. Swifty gave me a self-modifying gourd at King of Servers 2017, and as a Shaper player, I was just like, this might be like the best alt art ever. I'm just like immediate swap.
My story with Russell's alt art is that I put one in my deck by accident, not realizing it wasn't the real card, because that's how bad I am at paying close attention to card arts. And so the Levy, what's your version of it called?
Levy AR Greenhouse Access.
Yes.
Leafy, right?
Leafy, right. Leafy.
Yeah.
Leafy.
So the words are totally different, and I did not notice at all. And I put it in my deck, and I played it, and my husband was like, "What is that card?" And that was when I first noticed that it wasn't actually Levy.
Yeah, I think one of the downsides of me coming back with from Worlds without actually having done well at all is that I came back with a bunch of fan-made alt arts that are not always recognizable or have the right words on them.
No, that's an upside.
Yeah.
So the other guess about vegetable alt arts is that I'm hoping that Sanjay and I can collaborate on the next one. So it'll be a surprise when it comes out, but I think it's going to be a good one.
Guys.
Okay.
Right,
that'd be awesome. But yeah, so the big thing is one of the things that kind of brought you to us and brought us to recording this episode is that you travel a lot for work, as you've mentioned in online spaces before, and you get to visit a lot of metas. One of the things that you did is you came to King of Subways, which is going to be the meat of our show. But talk to me a little bit about, I so much want that experience for myself, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners would also be excited to hear what that experience has been like, kind of traveling around the world and playing in different metas.
So It's a ton of fun. I think I did 70,000 miles on business last year, flying around the world. Ooh. So I'm on the road a fair amount of time. So I always take a deck with me, or 2 decks. Sometimes I'm stopped at security asking what the suspicious, what the suspicious dense piece of organic material is in my bag. So I've learned not to travel with the ANR metal dice because they just get me flagged at security every single time. So I don't take those with me anymore. But yeah, I played in Berlin. I played in most European countries at some point. I think I got to go to Dutch Nationals last year, which was a lot of fun. Oh, fun. And then in North America. So I hooked up with the Philly meta when I was there. And actually, I'd never played Laurie Poulter in real life. And of course, he's a big UK player. But we actually met in Philadelphia and played our first game in real life in Philadelphia. But it's good because basically anywhere you go in the world, you can take a Netrunner deck and check out the local Facebook page and figure out. Usually, I've got some notice, so I tend to look online ahead before I'm going, and then send a message to the local organizer and say I'm going to be in your area in a couple of weeks' time. You know, if I was there on the Monday evening and had some time free, do you want to meet up? And it's when it happens, it's really good.
Yeah, so a question about that. What goes into deck selection if you know that you're going to be stuck with a deck for because I flit around like a butterfly. It seems like quite a commitment to one set of cards.
So, honestly, Sanjay, most time it's the deck I most recently sleeved up for a tournament in the UK and happen to have available when I'm frantically packing the night before. But this was different because obviously this was going for a specific reason for King of Subways. So I just played the decks that I'd got there. Although in Minneapolis we played draft, so I got the chance to do my second real life draft ever, and that was a load of fun. So really enjoyed drafting, and I managed to I drafted in Toronto with Dean and the group up there, and just got crushed. And those guys are so good at drafting. I went 0-6. And in one game, I was apocalypsed, account siphoned, quest completed, offer you can't refute, you name it. In that, I just got absolutely destroyed. So I was very happy that in Minneapolis, I went 2-4 rather than 0-6.
So I know that one of the NetrunnerQuest goals is, talking about getting better at the game, and I think to some extent you have a interesting perspective on that, in that you've gotten a lot of, I think, both due to putting yourself out there and asking for help and going on this recent cool trip, and also just your own initiative. You've gotten some cool insight into getting better. Is that fair? And if so, can you talk about that?
Sure. I don't think it's particularly profound and unique to me, but I think I started really working hard on improving my game, I guess, about a year ago. There's enthusiasm for the game, and that's one thing, but I decided I really wanted to get better. And I guess I've never taken, even in the first tournament that I went to at a GNK in Manchester, I always net deck. I've never taken anything less than the currently best tier 1 deck. So I'm not a deck builder. I know I just pick things which seem to be good at the moment and play those. Or, and I think this is really exciting about Netrunner, I email the world champion, or I send a message to the US national champion and say, what do you think I should play next week? And how many games are there like that where you can just get in touch? And they're really accessible. So Chris Dyer, if anybody wants to do it, he won't thank me for this. But if you
everyone wants to do it, should do that.
Just message Chris, right?
Yeah.
Or any of the big players in the game, they're all really open and accessible, and I've messaged all of them. Like the tournament, I did really well in a tournament in Manchester recently of King of Swiss, and I came second in that. And the runner deck that I took to that, I got from Dave Hoyland. And part of that, he pushed me to try something that was a bit different. So Dave is known for off-meta decks. And I'd been playing Reg Anarch for ages, and that seemed really good. But he's been on APOC Val and did really well at Cheltenham in a store championship there. So I took his deck and I played like 100 games with it. And after every game, I got back to him and said, "I just lost to this. What should I have done?" And he was really generous with his time. He just pushed me and asked me questions about what I was doing, and then said that was completely wrong. You should have done this instead. And I ended up doing really well.
Yeah,
that's really great. Yeah, and I really admire that.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, go ahead, Laura.
I feel like that is a common theme among people who have really done well, is that they reach out a lot. They talk to other people in the community a lot, and maybe that's the homework I need to give myself, is to be bold enough to like message someone that I don't really know, or even someone I do know, but I don't know, see as being too important to talk to me.
Well, I always make the joke, not completely jokingly, that I started my channel, the interview format of my channel, as an excuse to be able to approach top tier players and ask them about how they build their decks. I made it like I'm interviewing you, but I'm also taking notes on how to be good at this game.
Yeah.
So I guess what you're learning now is that you've done way too much work for that, because you can just.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that's been my to corroborate what Russell said. That's been my experience too. You know, living in a geographical location, close proximity to Dan D'Argenio, basically my entire Netrunner career. You know, I've always just been like, "Hey, oh, am I super quiet? Hang on." It's because Balder's pushing me farther and farther away from my microphone. Hopefully that's probably better. But what I was
You sounded fine to me, getting feedback from the Twitch viewers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But for me, you know, being close to Dan has always made it so I've been able to be very good at just having somebody be like, "Hey, take a look at this," and you know, work things out that way. Hopefully the mic volume's a little better now. But yeah.
So one question I have is that I think in terms of you know, especially prepping for a tournament, when you have access to extremely good Netrunner players, that's really handy, and you can get really good advice. And I know that even not messaging people, but just, you know, hearing them talk on a podcast or on a YouTube channel, my play gets better listening to people who are very good at Netrunner. I also wonder about, you know, my friends have very ready access to me, but I'm not a Netrunner genius. How can I help their game?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because the question, I think there is a set of questions which you can always ask, and those are the questions that help me all the time, especially in games or otherwise, which is that, you know, what are you trying, if somebody's building a deck and they've got a question for you about this, then, you know, a good question is, what are you trying to do with your deck? What is the purpose of your what is the purposes of your deck? Or what is your deck consistently lose to? And then it could be play, it could be the way you're playing your deck in that matchup, or it could be that your deck is generally weak and needs some shoring up or something else like that. And I think there are a good set of questions that experienced players know about, that anybody can ask. I mean, I'm going to confess, right? Dan messaged me the other day and said, "Would you take a look at this Geist list?" And I was like, "Seriously, Dan, you want me to look at a Geist list?" And he just said, "Well, you just played Geist at King of Subways, and you seem like you know what you're doing. So could you take a look at it?" And we chatted for ages about it, and I took it for a spin for 3 games on Jaina, and we realised that it was probably
garbage. It was garbage.
But we realised that we realised what the limitations were. We figured out why it was garbage, and we put it on one side. But I think that's something that any experienced Netrunner player, even if you're like experienced, you know, even if you may not be, you know, you're not world's top 16 level, you can ask those questions. So there's questions about deck building. I guess there's questions about play, and I think that's something that came out of King of Subways for me. And more recently, there are some things that I've been working on which are really sort of more at the higher levels of play, like So I have this joke, right? That I'm a master of plucking defeat from the jaws of victory. And it happens more than it should, and that's because I don't think enough about the ways. The good question is, how can you lose this match, and how is your opponent going to win this match? And when we get to talking about King of Serveways, there are a couple of instances there, but losing games that you should never have lost because you just didn't think about the ways that your opponent could win from this position, and then playing to avoid that and stopping that.
Right.
We have an anecdote.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, maybe
Russell and I just played a recent game online where that sort of happened, and then we chatted about it a lot afterwards, and I think we both learned a lot from it.
I was playing Abram, Jops, Raina Max deck against Laura, and I had it completely locked down. She'd got to 5 points, you'd got to 5 points, and I had money coming in like there was no tomorrow, and a remote, and Laura, you kept on jamming stuff in the remote, and I had this game completely locked until what happened, Laura? You can tell the story.
Well, I was on 4 points because I was on an all 3 pointers as Mari. And I had I was trying to go as fast as I could before he was set up, because that's what you have to do. And so I looked at my hand and I had 3 NGO fronts in my hand. So I jammed them like 3 turns in a row. Maybe I put something else in there in between. But and I watched, and every time he broke through the server, he did the same thing, which was click 3 times through the Fairchild and then use Security Nexus on the last dice, which was a News Hound, which he could break because he had an MK, but it was much cheaper with the Security Nexus. So I watched this happen like several times in a row, and then realized I have actually, I didn't even do the math. I just hoped it would work. I think I have just enough credits that if he follows this exact same pattern, I can put the winning agenda in and boost the Security Nexus trace, because we both had tons of money, but I could boost the Security Nexus trace enough that I could score out that last agenda and win, and it worked.
Yeah, so. and it worked spectacularly well, and I was very chagrined. But it draws a more generous point, is that there are some games that you think you've got locked, but if you don't, if you want a really high level play, good players don't make those mistakes, right? Well,
one of the things that Dan used to always tell me, and Dean, when Dean and I used to be in more close contact, or when he was on this show, a piece of advice that we've gotten from a lot of higher level players is the middleweight is figuring out how you win. The top tier is identifying how you lose and thinking every turn, not what is my line to victory, but what are my lines to loss and how do I avoid them? Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think is a critical mindset shift. And that segues really well into kind of the meat of our episode, because we, hanging out with you, talking with you, Russell, now because of the King of Subways experience, you got put onto a team with Kenny, otherwise known as Simon Moon, and Dan D'Argenio, 2 times world champion. And they kind of put you through a training regimen to kind of... Yeah, and I think there's a lot of value there for our listeners. So let's talk a little bit about the training regiment that you underwent to get ready for King of Subways.
Yeah, so Kenny's a hard taskmaster, bless him. So, so I realized I was going to be in New York. I should just tell the story. I realized I was going to be in New York, so I emailed Kenny and said, I think I can be there for King of Subways. Does anybody need a team? And he said, well, I need a team. My team needs a team member. And I didn't, and so I said, okay, great. Who's the other team member? And he said, Dan D'Argenio. And I was like, oh boy. The team is going to be the US Nationals runner-up, the 2-time world champion, and a guy who once came second in the store championship in Manchester. So how did we prepare? So the first thing is, so Kenny and I talked about factions. That was all the teams were doing that. So, and we agreed that probably Dan had already agreed that he wanted to do Val and Agi Fusion, so he was on those. And Kenny wasn't that fussed. And I really love Geist. I really enjoy playing Geist, and I'm pretty comfortable with them and with him. And as a faction, Criminal's pretty weak right now, except for Geist, which is good. And I knew I had other I've got access to people like Catherine, who's a really good Geist player, has played it a ton, so I knew that I could get input from them. And then Argus. And we didn't have an Argus list. I didn't have an Argus list. I played a lot of Scorp and done reasonably well with Scorp, but Kenny suggested this Argus list, which went undefeated in the tournament. So what did I do? I guess, so the first thing is I got a ton of games in, more games than I've ever got with any deck ever before. Literally, I don't know, I think I played 150 games with that Argus deck. And it's interesting to see how it breaks down. So to start off with, you're kind of the usual flailing around with the deck. And just trying to figure out what even are these cards. I've never boomed. I've never boomed anybody before I played this deck. Literally,
oh, man, you were missing out on one of life's great pleasures.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So I'd never
a crude
boomed
instrument, honestly.
So A, getting a lot of games in, but then B, I think the second part of that was some subtleties. Like, so for example, especially the night before, Kenny and I sat and we generated like 50 opening hands, and just said mull or keep. And we went through all of those opening hands saying, would you keep this hand? And if you would keep this hand, and then draw a card, and you can do that on a DB, what is your first turn going to be? And that meant, along with learning the deck itself and being there, that I didn't have to think in any game that I played that day, should I mull or keep? Maybe one I leaned across to Dan and Kenny and said, what do you think? This one's a bit marginal. But in general, I didn't have to think about that. And that relieved a lot of the anxiety. I've been to tournaments before when I haven't really played a deck before, but this time I really wanted practice.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for having confidence in the decks that you're bringing. I will bring decks that maybe the meta has shifted away from those decks being favored, but if I feel confident with them, I'm going to play them rather than jumping to something new that might be a better meta choice, but I haven't practiced.
Yeah, you took the Sync Boom deck to regionals.
Regionals last year.
Yeah, but after that had been out and it was on the decline, and you still went ripping through the top cut people with it.
That was probably my crowning achievement in Netrunner ever. Is I had my Sync Boom deck and sat across from Dan Dargenio, and we were in semifinals or something. So it was determining third place versus fourth place. And he looked over what I was playing, was like, oh yeah, I beat I went 6-0 against this deck at Euros or whatever the big tournament had been where he had done well, and he hadn't dropped any games to it. And then we went on to have a really interesting game, and I ended up winning, and so that
makes you the two-time world champion. I don't know if you knew that, but you're now the two-time world champion. You have to put a wife beater on.
So I have a question about the 150 hours of gameplay you put in with your, or I don't know if that was
150 games. No,
you said 150 games.
150 hours, jeez.
Yeah, that'd be wild. But regardless, it was a lot of time that you put in. Especially, I guess, I wasn't in on the last episode where Kevin talked to us about deliberate practice and there's different kinds of ways you can play. You can play, just casual games to sort of get a feel for a deck. You can play to sort of work on a specific matchup. What was the play like? It sounded like the main goal was to familiarize yourself with the deck and get comfortable with it. So can you talk to me about what that process was like?
Sure. So the first part is definitely becoming familiar with the deck and what are you going to draw and what's a good opening hand and so on. I think the thing that I focused on, especially as KOS grew nearer, was figuring out the specific lines for specific matchups. A better example of that is with the Geist list than with the Argus list, because I really, really struggled against CTM. And Catherine just beat me again and again and again, and I just couldn't figure out how to do this. And so one strategy, which you did talk about last time, I think it's worth, even if is the concept of coaching, or at least having somebody looking over your shoulder. I love having people looking over my shoulder, especially when they're more experienced. So we actually played, I think, 4 or 5 games I think it was even the night before. I was playing against Doge Diaper Industries, which is the consortium of Catherine and Dave Sayer. And they were playing. I just said, "Please, can you just play CTM?" And then Kenny and I were playing Geist against this, and we figured out that actually, normally as Geist, you just don't want to go tagged. It's just the death knell if you go tagged. You have no economy and all the rest of it. But we figured out that actually, if you can keep CTM low on money, and if you can get enough accesses in, the newer CTM builds don't have a lot of tag punishment. Maybe one exchange and one psychographics. And if you can keep them low on money and just get enough accesses in, especially if they drop to 1 QPM, you can actually do pretty well. And so I lost my fear of going tag me. And actually that sometimes that's the best thing to do. And normally as guys, you'd never do that. So I think learning specific matchups and having somebody looking over my shoulder, which I love it. When that happens, even if somebody just watching the game who I know is spectating, and then I get on chat behind the scenes or get on Slack behind the scenes and say, okay, this is my hand. What do you think? And that shared experience of learning a deck and figuring out, especially what are your lines against this matchup. And then adapting those lines based on the cards that you've actually got in your hand. So those are the two things that I really focused on this. The other thing that's part of that, I think, it didn't really come across in the last NetrunnerQuest, so it might be worth mentioning this. So if I'm playing against a friend, playtesting, it's good to stop at a particular, if there's a key point in the game, right? You stop. Right, especially if your opponents who you're playing with, you're learning with, is maybe made a misplay or they're making a run you think is a match. It's just they stop. Okay, just think what do you know about the game state right now, especially when they're runner. What are you running on this server for? What do you think the ice might be? What's the worst thing that could happen in this scenario? And then to think that avoids the situation that we were talking about earlier, where you make a critical misplay, the way you lose so much tempo. So I used to face check Archer a lot because I'd always forget that Wayland's got 6 credits and scored hostile. Every ice could be Archer.
Only 4 credits even.
Only 4
credits. 4 credits, that's right. So I think that's something that I did, especially running up to Nationals last year, was to play friends and then at critical points in the game, take stock. Or talk, especially talking through outs, right? So you're on what is probably the last turn in the game. Ben Bioken is really good at figuring out his optimal line to win, and that's something that I really valued. Is okay, if you could run here or you could run here, what are the statistical chances of a win in either direction?
Right.
Yeah, I like how he pauses his videos, or he instructs his viewers to pause the videos at certain key points and to think through what you should do. And of course, when he has hindsight when he's doing this because he records his games and then talks over them. But maybe that's a skill to work on. Like when you're playing a game live, to notice, oh, this is the critical turn. This is the critical point. Like stop and take
And that
stock.
brings me to something that when Noah McKee was on the show. He talked about the importance of when a game is fresh in your mind, taking notes. Can you identify the critical play that won you the game or the critical play that lost you the game, right? What are some of the key things that stick out in your mind, and just trying to write that down or put that in your phone immediately, because like a dream almost that kind of flies out of your head. You start talking to people and your brain starts changing that fresh evaluation of what happened. Right? The other thing that I think about, something that's a really good nougat there, Russell, that you mentioned, is a lot of people, when they're testing for a tournament, they focus a lot about what their deck wants to do and should do. And they gear all of their practice around making that happen. They don't gear any of their practice around, well, the engine is broken. How do I win from here? Right? Or my game plan is gone. How do I now use the tools that I built in this deck to do one thing, to do what I need to do to win this game, instead of what my deck intends to do? And I'll use an example of just a bullshit practice game that you and I had, Russell, where you ended up piling 6 tags on me as Argus, as my freedom build where I'm playing a lot of resources, and I'm like, well, I guess those are all hit points now. Let's do this. And I just had to immediately decide how lean could I run, how could I keep myself from getting murdered for as long as possible, and just focus on getting as many accesses as possible, because my game plan was over. Like, it was done.
Sure. And there's another great example from King of Subways, Dan, in the game that you and I had, where I lost the game. I had absolutely no
business
reason to lose, because you played your outs, and I took my eye off the ball. Right, I plucked defeat from the jaws of victory. You know, Geist should never be killed. There is no reason why Geist should ever die to Boom. Right, because you've got sport hoppers and you've got spy cameras, and I had on the lamb. I had, how could this possibly go wrong? And what happened, Dan? You tell the story.
I put down a naked 5/3 for you to steal, which you took, and then I bioticed. I triple punitived you, and then hit you for neural AMP.
Yeah.
That's
so you killed.
I don't get it. It's only 10 damage. How's
Yeah,
that
it's only.
Here's the learning, Dan. You did that, but I played another game. I played Andrew Cortez, CTZ, in San Francisco when I was there, and he was on a very similar deck to you, and I didn't make that mistake twice, right? So he was on a brain rewiring, Helheim servers nonsense deck, and I kept the sports hopper installed, and I kept on the lamb there, and you could see the light fade from his eyes as he realized that this wasn't going to go the way that it had gone.
I had such a nightmarish day with that CI punitive deck, because I ended up matched up against Geist 3 out of 5 rounds. And
wow.
Against Jesse just put down 2 sports hoppers, and I'm like, well, I guess the game's over.
Yeah, but I put down 2 sports hoppers too, Dan. I just fired them. And
you just used them, yeah.
But again, that highlights another example of the play from that day, which highlights this thing about thinking about how you lose the game. So playing against Jonas Wilson, probably the biggest name in Netrunner I've ever played. I was really happy to get a split with him. But when I was running against him as Geist, he had some really tough draws. So he played Ultraviolet Clearance twice, and the only card that he could install from his hand that was not an agenda was the Cerebral Overwriter that he wanted to Mushin out. So he ultravioleted and put out this unadvanced card, and I thought, oh, fine, I'll run that. Oh, it's a Cerebral Overwriter with no counters. That goes in the bin. And then he did Mushin one out. I was on 5 points, and all he had was FCOM. So I scored FCOM. What I didn't think about was, especially in the last probably 2 turns of the game, okay, I didn't think he's going to combo out. He's not going to kill me. He's just going to combo out. What should I be doing? What I should be doing is running his HQ for single accesses. It doesn't matter if you burn all of your breakers. If you don't win in the next turn, he's going to win. He's going to combo out. And especially when he's like, he spends 5 minutes looking at his hands, and then he draws a card, and it's like, okay,
he's close. Yeah.
You need to be running, and I didn't, and as a consequence, I lost the game. But I could have played to my outs, and I should have taken those accesses.
Do you think one thing I've noticed when I play against the Mushin deck is sometimes I get distracted by the Mushin game, that I'm too busy, trying to get in their mind and figure out, oh, well, what did they do? What would they want to do? What did they draw? And I am too busy playing that game instead of playing Android Netrunner, where and I'm trying to find how do I get to 7 points.
Get accesses, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that. Yeah.
No, I think that's very true. And I think the other thing that happened from King of Subways is I realised that that it's a mistake. Yes, good opponents, the players who are really good players. They have that reputation for a reason, but ultimately there is an element that you're playing the person, not just the cards. But if you play you're playing the cards. The cards are on the table, right? The other person, if they're really, really good, is going to be playing those cards in a very skilled way. But ultimately, if you've got a good deck, I think I lost my fear of playing against good players as a consequence of actually I took a game off Jonas Wilson. That was really, really pleasing. We split, and that's given me a lot of confidence that these players are human and not directly fallible. Certainly Jonas didn't lose because he made a mistake. He'd lose because in that particular matchup, the cards fell my way, and I was able to play them in a way such that I managed to win. So my confidence grew a lot, I think, as a consequence of doing the tournament.
Yeah, I think that also helps just in terms of if you go into a matchup thinking that you're going to lose, you make bad decisions.
Yeah. Having confidence, and one thing for me is that I tend to play a little bit on the slower side. Like, I like to think about what I'm doing, and a lot of the top players play very quickly. And so kind of coaching myself that I don't have to play as fast as them. I can take my time and think about what I'm doing and not feel intimidated and pressured by the fact that they're a really good player playing fast. That's something that's helped me too.
Yeah, I used to go to time in every single round. I mean, it was just crazy. But I think that comes with practice, and the more games you've got with a deck, it's like with chess. When you recognise a certain pattern of cards against a match-on that you've played a lot of times before, you don't have to think about it. Argus, you've got ice and a hostile first turn. You just score the hostile. I score hostile, 5 credits, go, right? And as opposed to thinking, so. And then when it comes to the crucial points where you've really got to think long and hard about the line you're going to take, that's when you can, that's when you do that. I mean, so yeah.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about the King of Subway format is that if you have the skill to identify when moments in a game line up where taking your time and really focusing on them is valuable, not only... I mean, that's useful in any game when you're like, oh, I really need to think through what I'm doing. But if you do recognize that moment, you even have 2 consultants to talk through your decisions on. I think one thing that I think we did, our team did pretty well.
Yeah, we haven't really done the celebrate King of.
Oh yeah.
We kind of backwards got back into talking about King of Subways, but yeah.
Well, I was going to say that I think we didn't do a great job of taking advantage of the format, and I do think that there were other teams that did a better job.
That's something I was proud of. Even though the Net Ready guys did not have a strong finish, we finished 1 slot above middle. I was really proud of Alan and Thomas. We had a lot of table talk. We went over our opening hands and mulligans every time, And I was the dead weight. This tournament. I think the 2 of them each only dropped 1 game.
Yeah.
No.
They got swept the last round. So I think both of them dropped 3 games, but that's still a pretty low number.
No, it is. Well, I also was dead weight, and my 2 compatriots were able to drag me to 2nd place. So they couldn't have only lost 1 game. That's ridiculous. Yeah. Unless you did really badly, maybe.
I was really proud going back to the discussion. Alan, who has been playing a lot less frequently, but has really kind of zoned in on Titan. He was taking games off of good people all day. He swept Jonas. He swept a couple other people on other teams that are really good. And he was just really focused, really good about his outs, and just kept his cool in a way that I haven't seen him do very much until this year, when he did really well at the charity tournament and really well at this. But you guys, let's talk about your guys' performance, because you guys actually did well.
Yeah, so Tolaasin's team got 1st place, so
share
about that a little bit.
By a wide margin.
Yeah, quite a margin.
Yeah. So my main worry going into the tournament was that playing alongside Dan and Kenny would mean that they were basically just playing my decks for me, and I was really there just to hold the cards. But that didn't happen. In fact, I was on stream in one game, and I leaned across to Dan, who was already preoccupied with his claim, and I showed him my opening hand and said, "What do you think, Dan?" And he looked across at me and said, "I don't know. I've never played your deck before." So okay, just focus back and hunker down. So it worked well, I think, for us. So those guys are great players. Kenny went 10-0, Dan went 8-2. Argus carried me, and it's really solid. So many good games. I think the good thing about the team tournament is that there were just 1 or 2 games where it was really tense. So Kisra and I, Kat, were playing in a really, really tense game, and there was a point where it was actually 3-on-3. So behind Kisra, Justin was there, and the other player on their team, and on my side, I've got Dan and Kenny, and so we're all looking at our hands and trying to figure out what's going on, and so that was a load of fun. To be, pointing at cards and saying, "What do you think about that one?" and all the rest of it, and that was really nice about the team tournament. You can support each other in between rounds, talk about where you've gone,
Honestly, I'm gonna say. Maybe have an unpopular opinion and say the opposite. I found it kind of distracting and difficult when it got to the point where, Sanjay and Ian were both finished their games and were looking over my shoulder helping me. Having those extra voices competing with the voice in my head, I started to feel overwhelmed and there was a turn where I was finally able to get in and trash a blacklist, and I had told myself, okay, I need to make sure I install my paperclip while this blacklist is gone, because he could just reinstall another one from hand next turn, and almost forgot to do that because everyone had opinions on what I should do with my so I don't know. The team format is certainly fun. I'm not sure it actually helped me play better.
I think it depends.
Well, I think go ahead.
I think it depends, and I don't mean this to malign Sanjay in any way, but I think that's because you're the strongest player on your team. I don't think that it's unfair to say that in competitive environments, and you also are somebody who knows your decks ridiculously well.
I think that's the part of it. I was on Max, which I've been playing pretty much exclusively for 6 months now, which everyone hates.
Yeah,
my
that deck
is
inside.
So tired of playing against Max.
But you know that deck inside and out, and it's tough when and it's tough when you know a deck inside and out, because people may come in with that insight, but they're also just muddying up your thought process that you've practiced and trained. But
so having confidence in a team environment to say, no, actually, guys,
I got it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's more. I think the way you worded it is that's something that you need to work on. But really, we're your teammates and we're trying to help you. We should have the humility to recognize when.
You certainly did. When I said, I don't know, I said something along those lines when I was feeling a little too pressured, and you guys backed right off. So yeah.
No, but that's fair.
And I think another thing to keep in mind, though, just going back to the multi-headed dragon nature of the tournament, and going back to the beginning of the episode where Russell brought up us testing that Geist idea that I had together. I think if you another takeaway from this episode is if you can transplant out that multi-headed testing, like what you did with Kenny with the opening hands or things like that, or you're double piloting on JNet. One, it's a ton of fun. Sanjay and I do it every morning or alternate mornings, and it's amazing how much you learn about your own play style and your own thought process about the game when you have somebody else being like, why are you gonna do that?
Yeah, why are you doing this?
Yeah, or them having an insight, or them saying something, and you're learning from each other, and then you're looking at the deck list, and they're evaluating card slots and bringing up cards that maybe you don't play with very often that you hadn't thought of. So I think there's a lot there. If you have a friend or somebody online that you want to reach out to that plays an archetype or an identity that you're interested in. Duo testing, where you can get that extra head in there to kind of think about it and give feedback to how you're playing it or how you're building it. I've found that incredibly valuable in my play.
Yeah,
I think so.
The other thing that came out of this, I think we often focus on the specific things that we could learn, lines at the end of a game or something else like that, or how to play against CTM, whatever else it might be. But the most useful thing that came out for me of King of Subways, and actually having sat alongside Kenny for most of the day and playing him a lot of times the evenings before, I said to him, what what do you think of my play? What do you think? What could I focus on? And his interesting answer, he said, his answer was a bulk level observation, not a specific observation. His observation was, as the corp, you wait until you're sure that you can score. You don't see the board as your opponent sees it. So you've got your remote is paper. Your remote is vanilla and Horton, and your opponent has Black Orchestra in the bin, right? And maybe you've seen off an inject. They've got paperclip in hand, and you're not install advancing Archer in that remote because you know that your opponent can get in. But if you think about it from your opponent's point of view, you've got 2 unres dice and a scored hostile. Either of those could be Archer. They don't have MK Ultra. Maybe they've got something else on the data sucker on the board or something else like that they don't want to lose. And so you should put yourself on your opponent's side of the board and say, what does that look like? And take more risks with scoring windows.
Yeah.
And I've done that in the weeks after King of Subways, and I've won a lot more games by being bolder and not waiting for that completely secure moment when there is no way that my opponent could get into the remote to steal.
I've got to say, I love what NGO Front has done to the game in terms of like scoring agendas when you really don't have a window to score an agenda. Because if it's like pretty obvious that you don't have a window and you install advance, they'll like a lot of the time think that it's an NGO Front, and you can get like a bold score. In the Cash Refresh finals, I was against Crit Hit D20, who is Greg Tung, who got second at World. So I was very intimidated by that. I had been undefeated with my Ag Infusion deck, and I drew just the worst hand. It had like 3. I was on all 3 pointers, and I had 3 of them in my opening hand, and so I ended up just naked. I think I got money turn 1, but turn 2 I was I just naked advanced an Obokata, and he didn't check it because I assumed he thought it was an NGO.
Who would do such a madness thing?
Yeah, so I was able to get one of the agendas out of my hand that way. Another one I just dropped in the discard, and so then he correctly assumed that I had been flooded when he saw what I did, but by then I was down to just 1 in 5 agendas, so was able to recover and eventually win that game.
Yeah, incidentally, those games are incredible. Our very good friend Kevin streamed them, and they're on his channel. You should check them out. It was an incredible finals.
Yeah,
they were really fun.
It's the Hacktivist on YouTube. I'll put a link in the show notes when I export out to YouTube.
Sounds good. Nice.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is and this is something that seems obvious when we talk about it, but I think especially now that runners have really strong economy, or not as strong as they once did, but runners are pretty consistent now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have been for a long time. So I feel like a lot of times we have this issue where we assume that the runner has every tool, right? But even if they do, they might not use them, even if they have those tools available. And that's something that I think Argus helps with, and a couple other identities help with. You just happen to be like, I'm going to make you scared of what I have in store for you. Because that's what the corp game in Netrunner is all about, is hidden information and leveraging that the runner has imperfect knowledge.
Yeah, I think one... go ahead.
No, you go.
I was thinking, I play a lot of off-meta decks, and I think one thing, besides the fact that the reason they're off-meta is because, they're probably worse, I think one disadvantage I have is that, if I slot hard-hitting news in a Tenon deck, nobody's going to respect hard-hitting news. I have to, which has advantages of, I can surprise people with them, but I have to draw hard-hitting news and punish them to make them punished. Whereas if you're playing any yellow deck, you don't even need to have the card in your deck, and you have hard-hitting news threat. During my game against Kenny at King of Subways, I was playing around C-Source EOI to a big degree, and he doesn't even have C-Source in the deck. I think that's it was an interesting. I think one thing that I hadn't really reflected on is to what extent hidden fears. You need to take advantage of them and not too easily put your opponent at ease.
Yeah.
Sorry, Laura, you were going to say something.
I forget what I was going to say, but that reminded me of a game at King of Subways where my opponent turned and talked to their teammate and said, I could do this and steal this agenda maybe, but what if she has punitive? Can I survive? Can I recover from punitive? I was not running punitive, but the whole rest of the game, I would occasionally ask him how many cards he had in his hand, how many credits he had, just because he gave me the idea that he was worried about punitive, and so I faked having punitive the whole rest of the game, and he played more played more cautiously than he should have.
That's the best way to shark somebody. That's the best way to shark somebody, is you just keep asking them how many cards they have in their hand.
Yeah, I will say that, I mean, that's one of the big things that, NBN got a huge power drop from Sweeps Week rotating, because, they used to be able to just always ask how many cards you have in your hand, and that just makes your opponent scared. But I will say this, if you're playing at a team tournament, you got to be careful about what information you're giving the opponent, because sometimes it is not worth it. I think at King of Servers at Worlds, I was just over advancing a Beal, and every time it was their turn, they talked to me about what level they were comfortable with, how many advancements there were on my card, and I was able to get they're like, they just told me they're not going to run on it. I'm like, okay, all right, good to know.
Oh yeah, that game where you won with just the one super Beal.
No, I didn't win that game. I had no shot. But I did score a 4-point Beal, which is as close as I could get to being happy.
Yeah.
That's so looking at some of the big high level observations here, some of the big things, you kind of got, Russell, not an outsider's perspective, because obviously you're a Netrunner player. That's a weird way to phrase it. But you came into one of the more disciplined, practiced groups in Netrunner. Kenny and Dan play a lot. They test a lot.
Well, yeah. I don't think Dan has.
Dan just picks up a deck and wins with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so you got this view in, and it's a lot of the things that we've been talking about. But for you, is it like a gestalt thing that you take away from this, or is there some critical mindset that you took away from that experience?
No, I think the experience definitely has given me stuff that I will put into practice in the next tournaments that I go to. So making sure that I know a deck, practicing the key. I will definitely do the 50 opening hands thing, right? And think about those. But again, doing that, I would say Netrunner is an individual experience in play, but it's much, much better as a shared experience in practice, right? I get much more out of practicing and sharing the practice with somebody else, even if it's just two people talking to each other. Somebody, I think it was Mark, who practices with Dave Hoyland, wrote an article about practicing and preparing, and he said, if you're practicing in real life, you should talk about what you've got in your hand, because at the highest levels, your opponent probably already knows that and has figured it all out anyway. So disclosing that and talking about whether you should keep an opening hand, and actually then having them play on, knowing that they've got that in the opening hand, actually tests those higher level skills. But I think definitely practicing as a shared experience rather than individual experience is something that personally I get much more pleasure from. And I know that we're on casual. It's so easy on casual JNet to jump into a game and then good game and move on to the next one. But I would rather, Laura, play you, or Sanjay, or Dan, or whoever else is there, and then actually after the game is finished to say, okay, what did we learn from that game? Grinding is sometimes good, but actually, and I know that Dave Sayer is definitely of this opinion. He and I have talked about it a number of times. Playing one game in competitive against a good player who's then willing to talk with you about the lines that you took, once you've got your head around the basic deck and so on, is probably worth 10 games in the casual lobby. And
that's
I wish
good
I
advice.
could, and I should. In fact, that's one thing that's definitely come out of King of Subways, is that I've played more games in the competitive room on JNet in the last month than I played in all of 2017.
I definitely practice in competitive rather than in casual, but if it's not someone I know, I never like initiate a post-game conversation because I just feel like maybe I'm wasting their time, maybe they would think it's annoying, something like that. So I should try to do that a little more. People who play Netrunner are really nice for the most part, and yet I'm always afraid to engage them. So
I think starting off the game and saying, this is an interesting game. Would you mind if at the end of the game we talk for just 2 minutes about how it went?
Mm-hmm.
I've never had somebody say no. Never had somebody say no. Netrunner people are nice people in the vast majority of cases, and the ones who aren't go on my JNet block list, and I never see them anyway. So
that's a great thing that exists now.
Well, I think going back to like the quality of practice, you know, it comes down to something that I've discussed many times. You know, I love going to tournaments, I love playing, but I'm like above average trash. So we're not getting into my self-deprecation here, Sanjay, because I saw your face. What my favorite thing about Netrunner is talking about Netrunner. Like, my favorite part of a tournament is the part where we all go to dinner afterwards and like talk about our games for like 2.5 hours and like talk about the meta and talk about archetypes and deck slots in our decks. And what you're talking about is like doing like a micro version of that, right? Like being thoughtful about the game. And this is something you put in the, you know, some of the write-up notes that you gave us, is being thoughtful about the game is useful. And that's something that actually, when Dan came on the channel, he said sometimes thinking about the game in a really constructive way with other people is better than even playing a test game. Because
we're losing you on audio there. Lost you on audio there.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
I could hear you the whole time.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, no worries.
Oh, no, it's fine.
But sometimes talking about the game in a thoughtful way is more useful than, you know, that's really useful, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's a really good nougat to take away and that's why we love meetups, right? That's why we love going to tournaments and then hanging out with people afterwards, especially the people that beat us, because that feedback, is what we live for, right, in this game, because that's where the improvement lives.
Yeah, we should do more of that.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about homework for next episodes?
Sure. Really quickly, we can go a little bit over an hour. Really quickly, okay. Laura, what were you going to say?
I don't remember.
It was about the feedback from people that beat you.
Oh. I was going to say, we've really been struggling to arrange meetups because most of us are parents and it's just hard to get out and do things. But what if we did this more often, where we just did a Skype chat and just talked about Netrunner more? I don't know. Just wanted to throw that idea out there.
Like bi-weekly, we can do a Skype chat and talk about like Netrunner and
yeah, like once every 2 weeks maybe.
So I could suggest some homework around the theme of shared practice and quality practice, which is we could do it for each other, or with your, you know, if you're listening to the podcast later on with your local play team, is to play some games. In real life, obviously, it's easy, but because I travel so much, JNet is 90% of my playing, and in real life is only 10%. So Laura or Sanjay or Dan, let's play a game on JNet this week. Let's arrange to do that, or if we see each other on. But let's talk about the game. Let's after the game, let's take 5 minutes to think about where was the point where the person who lost the game, right? Where was the person who won the game realized what their winning line had to be? At what point in the game did you decide, okay, I need to do this, and so I'm going to be doing this from now on. Those kinds of observations for me are really important. Tempo is really critical, right? Was there a point in that game where you just lost tempo to the point that the game for you wasn't winnable from there? So let's see if we can improve the quality of our practice games and
by bringing somebody on.
So a question: Do you think it's more helpful for me to play against you and then have that chat afterwards, or for me to spectate with hands revealed and watch you play against someone else and then we talk about it?
Both of those are great, right?
Okay.
So I love both of those, right? So
let's do both.
let's do both, and to have somebody watching I love getting feedback. I say, and it's a really valuable tool. I mean, Dave, I know Dave's watching the watching the stream and commenting. Dave has often spectated my games, and then after the game, he just messaged me and said, "I didn't like X." Right, I didn't like the daily casts. I was playing against Catherine the other day, and I installed. The game was nearing the end, and I installed daily casts and Underworld Contacts when I had enough money to win. I think she was on Titan, so she's going to win by rushing out. That was 2 wasted clicks and 4 wasted credits that I could have put more usefully into something else. That's really good feedback, and I think feedback on and observations about, because I think once you're at a certain level, it's those nuances that make the difference in the play that you'll win in the cut if you take advantage of those learnings next time, whereas you might not win in the cut if you ignore them or don't see them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So just to kind of codify for those watching at home and listening at home who may want to follow along, try to get in several practice games between now and the next time we record in approximately 2 weeks, where you do like a two-headed dragon type thing where you and another person, maybe somebody else in your meta who's familiar with the archetype that you're trying to play, you pilot a deck together, or you find somebody who you know is going to probably kick your butt at Netrunner, and play with them, and then have a chat afterwards about their lines, their hands, your lines, what unfolded in the game, and get that other perspective. Because, I know from my own part, I grind a shitload of games of Netrunner every week, and they feel, we've had this conversation before, I don't get a lot out of them because I rip through them too fast. So I think that's really good feedback and really good homework, because if I'm just grinding games without really if I'm in like a mindless state while I'm doing it, I'm not really getting any meaningful information out of that.
Yeah, I think you put it well.
Yeah.
Sanjay, do you have anything to add?
No, that sounds great. I agree.
Okay. So, Russell, thank you so much for coming to visit us in the United States and being on the show.
Sure.
Yeah, it was so nice meeting you in person.
Yeah, and it was a wonderful experience to be there. One of the absolute tip-top experience of my net running journey to date. And I hope that, I'm looking forward to getting into more metas and where am I? My travel. I'm in Bucharest. I don't know how much Netrunner is there in Bucharest. Does anybody know?
I guess you're gonna find out.
Maybe bring some teaching decks with you.
Yeah, I could do that too. But it was a ton of fun to be there, and it was one of those situations where I was delighted when I got matched against Laura in one round, and I was also delighted when I was matched against Dan another. And to confess, Sanjay, somewhat disappointed that I didn't get to play in real life.
Yeah, I know.
Hope there'll be another time.
That's true. Well, come visit us in Delaware sometime.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of chemical engineering stuff around here.
We do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, what a great what a great experience. And also, if you've never done the King of Subways, King of Servers style team tournament in your area, there's a lot of information on it online, and people in Slack know about it. Try to put one of those events together if you can, even if you have a small number of teams. It really is a fun experience, and it's really shakes up how you have to play, because everybody has to play something different, right? So you by the very nature of the format, you can't have, well, the winning team is 3 indexing vals and 3 CTMs. You know what I'm saying? You can't be like that. Everybody has to play stuff, and even though I complained the entire time, I ended up having to learn how to play my CI deck against 4 out of the 5 decks I played were strongly favored against me. And I had to learn how to pilot against that. And that was really useful for me. Even if I didn't pull out those games, that experience was really good because I wanted to win those games. And so I put the mental energy into trying to find my lines.
Yeah. I'm personally still kicking myself for losing to Russell's Argus deck because my husband plays Argus and, like, my max deck should win that matchup like 9 out of 10 times. So.
It was hilarious, right? I was playing in JNet the other night, and I was playing the deck from King of Subways. So I still think it's one of the best corporation decks that's out there right now. And my opponent typed in chat after I'd read an Archer. They typed in, somebody writes up in a deck description that Archer's a good ice, and all of a sudden everybody's playing it.
Yeah, imagine.
Sorry.
I think what it really comes down to is it's funny. This is what we'll probably leave on is that people forget about good cards because then the situations that made them stop being played have passed, right? Like Archer stopped being played for a long time because during a period of time before like the MWL and a bunch of other things, it was just a race to 7 points. So sacrificing agendas was really bad, and runners were able to very efficiently or more efficiently break it, right? Now that everyone's on MK Ultra, Archer's way good again, but people just kind of like forgot about it. Like they never revisited the card.
Yeah, although Maxwell James is rearing his ugly head, which makes me very, very sad as Argus
that
when I
card
read
is
it.
so good. I love it. I love Maxwell
I hate
James.
that card so much.
But yeah, everybody,
anyway,
thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come hang out with us. And until we hear from all you fine Netrunner humans again, always be running.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
see ya.